So how does that work in the United States? A lot of people may be wondering that. For me, when I was in debt, when I was like in $60,181 worth of debt, I kind of felt like I didn't know how it worked. I understood the late payment aspect of it. I understood, okay, it goes to collection, and then what? It was just like a fog. So how that works in the United States. So how does that work in the United States? It's important to understand how that works in the United States, because once you understand how that works, you understand why some people get huge discounts on debt, on their debt, and other people pay the full amount plus fees. What's up? What's up? What's up? So let's say you have a Capital One credit card with a $5,000 limit, and you overspend on that card, and now you can't pay it back. So you stop making the minimum payment. 30 days later, your credit report shows a 30 days late, and it brings down your score, right? So that's like the first 30 days of what it would look like when you stop paying that minimum payment, right? So you stop paying that minimum payment, now you get those 30 days late, and it brings down your score. 60 days later, your credit report shows a 60 days late, and it brings your score down even more. This happens all the way until day 180, right? So at this point, once it gets to day 180, the account goes into what's known as charged off status, right? Charged off is really a term that means that the original creditor doesn't expect the debt to be paid and has drained it off on their books. This does not, and I really want to clarify this does not mean that the debt is forgiven, right? A lot of people try to say that when the account gets in charged off status, that the debt gets forgiven. That does not mean that the debt gets forgiven, right? It just means that the original creditor doesn't expect to get that money back, doesn't expect you to pay that money, but they're still trying to collect on it. They can and they will go after the debt. Let me tell you that. So in this scenario, I want to basically go over what would Capital One do. Here's what the original creditor can do next. They can, one, assign the debt, which if they assign the debt, Capital One still owns the debt. Now, what they usually do is they'll contract a collection company to go after that debt, but Capital One still owns that debt. They have the option to sell the debt, right? So Capital One, in this case, Capital One would not own the debt anymore, and it gets sold either outright to a collection company, or if the debt is old and they really can't locate you, they might sell it to what's known as a junk debt buyer, which is another word for them is JDBs, right? They can also sue you for the debt. In this case, Capital One would take you to court. Now, this usually really just happens when it's for a higher dollar amount. Every company is different. Every original creditor is different. For some, I've seen them take people to court for as little as $750. But I've also seen debts of, I think it's like $5,000 that they basically didn't do anything about it. So Capital One can take you to court. This usually happens when it's like a really high dollar amount. And I added this last point, and this is kind of why I don't like to lie on my credit card applications. I know, like in the credit space, everybody really talks about how, oh, let's just lie on your income. They don't verify it. Let's go ahead and say you're making 150,000 when in reality you're only making 40. That way the bank can approve you for a bigger line of credit. And although I know that that's norm in the industry, because I've seen cases where banks or original creditors sue the individual, and the individual they find that lied on the application. Now the individual committed banking fraud, and now they're basically going to try to throw that guy in jail. I don't want any of that. I rather, instead of having one credit card with a big limit, I'd rather be, not lie on any application and have a bunch of credit cards with small limits that ultimately add up to big amounts. So this is why I don't like to lie on the applications, just because I have seen multiple times where clients get sued for their debt, and I'm just not trying to be on the other side of that. The next thing that they can do is they can forgive the debt with what's known as a 1099-C. So in this case, Capital One forgives the debt, and it usually happens with low amounts, like I haven't seen this for more than like $5,000. And that was like, I think it was 5.5 years of them trying to collect on that debt. And they just weren't getting it at that point. And at that point they understood. So let me break down each of these scenarios, right? So you got to understand this. Capital One is not what's considered a high amount in these cases. It all depends. The highest I've seen was $5,000, but every bank is different. So, for example, Capital One might try to take you to court for $4,000, and Chase might not try to take you for 10. Every bank is different, right? But the highest amount that I've seen that was basically discharged was around like 5,000. But it was like 5 years, I think, that they were trying to collect on that debt. So Capital One is not in the business of going after money. Capital One's in the business to make money. They're not in the business of going after money and collecting. They're a bank. They're not a collection company. So what they can choose to do is assign the debt to a collection company. This means Capital One still owns the debt. They're simply assigning a collection company to try and collect the debt on their behalf. The assigned collection company usually works on a contingency fee, meaning they don't get paid unless they collect on the debt. And when they do collect on the debt, they take a fee from the original creditor. This little thing right here it opens up a little room for negotiations on the debt. So let's say months pass and the collection company that was assigned the debt still has not been able to collect on the debt. The original creditor can choose to claw back the debt from the assigned collection company. Just like in that picture you see there, and the mom is dragging the kid back. The collection company can choose to do that from the creditor, right? In a situation, this usually happens when you see people with like Platinum Fitness collections, that Platinum Fitness owns the debt, but they'll assign it to a collection company because Platinum Fitness can't report on to the three bureaus. But they can assign a collection company which has the right licenses to report to the three credit bureaus. So that's why you never see Planet Fitness or Blink on the credit report. You see the collection company that was assigned to. And usually in those cases, what works sometimes is to pay the original creditor and then have them claw back that debt. So that works in some cases, and every case is different, right? Because every collection company is different. So the original creditor may choose to claw that debt back from the assigned collection company. The original creditor can also choose to completely sell the debt. So let's say, for example, in certain cases, the original creditor could be Sprint, right? And Sprint can sell it to another collection company. And then let's say that collection company is not doing a good job. Sprint can claw back that debt and then decide, you know what? Do I want to assign it to somebody else? Or do I just want to straight up sell the debt to a collection company or a junk debt buyer? Now, I really want to briefly explain what the difference is. So junk debt buyers are just collection companies. They're just in the business of collecting debt. But they're usually differentiated by one simple thing, and it's what type of debt that they like to buy. So for example, collection companies, the normal collection companies, you'll see them buy debt immediately from the original creditor, meaning it's probably been like 180 days since you last paid that. Like for example, SoFi immediately sells it to Resurgent. Once you're 180 days late, SoFi in New York will sell your account to Resurgent immediately. Now, what are the chances that Resurgent collects on that debt? Very high because it's only been 180 days, right? Junk debt buyers, on the other hand, they usually like to get the bottom of the barrel. The collections that they haven't been collected on in 4, 5, 6.5 years, some that are maybe outside the statute of limitations. So junk debt buyers, they really like to buy junk debt. Junk that basically nobody thinks that they can collect on. Why? Because then they get bigger discounts on that debt. Because if nobody thinks that they can collect on that debt, that's when they buy the debts for cents on the dollar. So it all depends on how old that debt is. The older that debt is, the more likely that it's going to get sold to a junk debt buyer. And sometimes just because debt is with a collection company right now doesn't mean it can't get sold to a junk debt buyer in the future. So, oh, my bad, let me put that back. So going back, the original creditor can choose to completely sell that debt to a collection company or a junk debt buyer. If they sell the debt in this scenario, the original creditor no longer owns the debt. The debt belongs to the collection company they either sold it to or the JDB that they sold it to. One of them owns the account. You'll know in the scenario, you'll know if the account got sold if you try to call the original creditor and they tell you, oh, we don't service this account anymore. It's in LVNV's hand or it's in Portfolio Recovery's hand. That's it. That debt most likely got sold completely, and the original creditor might not even accept a payment for that debt. So here's the catch. If the original creditor chooses to do this, it's because they have not been able to get a hold of you, either by phone or by email or in person knocking on your door. If they choose to sell the debt, it's a big sign. It means they have not been able to get a hold of you, right? And they want any amount of money instead of simply getting $0. Because remember, if you owe, let's say Discover $5,000 and you haven't paid them in a year, do you think they want to take zero or they want to take something? So at this point, whoever buys the debt typically buys the debt for a 30 to a 99% discount. Now, there's a little asterisk there because a ton of factors determine this. So one of the factors is how old is the debt? Is the debt still within the statute of limitation? Do they have all the required paperwork to collect that debt? A lot of things, right? So usually the cases that you get like the 80, 85% discount, those are because that debt is probably outside of the statute of limitation. They're probably not reporting on your credit report anymore. And that debt was probably sold 4 or 5 times in there with a junk debt buyer. And now at that point, the junk debt buyer probably bought that $5,000 debt for $5, and he's trying to get 10, 15, 20 bucks. So you read that right, up to 99%. So the $5,000 example that we had that where you owed Capital One $5,000 on the Venture X could be sold to a junk debt buyer for as little as $50. So this opens up a huge window of negotiation. There's a big difference when a debt is assigned. There he is again, that good guy Jerry. So that opens up a huge window for negotiation. Why? Because now the junk debt buyer is getting the debt for cents on the dollar. They're just trying to collect anything at that point to make it to make their job easier, right? They don't need to collect the full amount. They're gonna try to collect the full amount, but they don't need to. This opens up a huge window for negotiations where you can typically get 30 to 90% discount on the debt owed. So, but let's say the original creditor decides that they don't want to take a big hit on the debt. Let's say it's a huge amount and they don't want to sell it to a junk debt buyer, right? They're like, nah, we don't want to sell it for cents on the dollar to a junk debt buyer. We know we can still get this money, right? Maybe the guy just doesn't have any funds right now. They can simply choose to sue you in hopes of getting a judgment against you for the full amount. They can use this judgment against you for 2 things. One, they can garnish your wages, meaning they take a percentage of your paycheck to pay back the debt. And if you don't get a standard paycheck, they can use that judgment to place a levy on your bank account, meaning every single dollar you put into your bank account will automatically get used to pay back the debt. If you do get sued or from an original creditor or a collection company, just let me know so I can help. I can at least try to find you help. I've been in this space for a while, so I know a lot of people and I've seen a lot of situations where the people I know come in very helpful, trust me. So, because remember this, the last thing that they want is for you not to show up in court. This is exactly what they hope you do so that you can get a default judgment for the full amount. They want a default judgment for the full amount because once they have that default judgment, they're not negotiating with you. The court already gave them the right to collect that full amount. They're not negotiating with you, trust me. So once they get that full judgment for the full amount, it's better to show up to court and try to negotiate the balance down than to let them get a default judgment for the full amount. Now, let's say for some reason Capital One decides that the debt is too small to sue for you, like to sue you for it, and they don't want to waste their time and their money, because you got to keep this in mind. It costs Capital One a ton of money to send lawyers over there to try to fight on their behalf as to why you owe them the money. So if they decide that the debt is too small and the debt hasn't been collected on in years, they can simply choose to forget the debt and send you a 1099-C, which means that they have canceled the debt completely. But please confirm with the original creditor to confirm if the debt is officially gone. Many cases, I've seen many cases where the 1099-Cs are sent by error and the original creditor is still trying to collect on that amount. So before you submit that on your taxes to pay taxes for that amount, make sure that the 1099-C was correctly sent and they're not chasing it. So now I want to talk about a few things outside in the presentation that I couldn't fit. The first one is statute of limitation, right? Statute of limitation, not to be confused with statute of limitation, is basically how long these collection companies, original creditors, and anybody you owe money to legally has in order to sue you, right? So for example, I'll give you what I know in New York, because I only operate in New York. In New York, on credit card debt is 3 years, right? So if the client's last payment, for example, was in 2020, January of 2020, if his last payment was then, 3 years from there, which will be January 2023, if the original creditors such as Chase, Capital One, Wells Fargo hasn't sued him at this point, then it really becomes optional for the client to pay that debt. Why? Because that debt is now officially outside of the statute of limitations and is considered time-barred debt. Time-barred debt is just debt that cannot legally be sued on because it's outside of the statute of limitations. Now, the original creditor can still report it on your credit report for 7 years, and they can report a balance on your credit report for 7 years, which, as if you've heard the previous lessons that we spoke about, that really impacts your credit score for the full 7 years. So if the debt is outside the statute of limitations and you've already tried disputing and you've tried doing a bunch of things to improve your score, and the last thing you can do is basically just pay that account, then at that point you can leverage that the debt is outside of the statute of limitation and it's considered time-barred debt to get a decent discount. Why? Because they can't sue for that debt anymore. Let's say Capital One, let's say I signed up for that Capital One card in New York, they can't sue me for that debt anymore. Why? Because it's outside the statute of limitations. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't report it. They can still report it, and they will. And there's been many times where I've advised clients to pay those debts outside the statute of limitations, but we obviously leverage that to get 60, 70% discounts on those debts. And we even got installment plans on them. Why? So that the client's credit report can finally grow from that, right? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the impact on the credit score. Obviously, when you're first trying to, like, let's say if your goal is to negotiate your debt, Amex, Capital One, Chase, they're not going to negotiate with you if the account is current. Why would they even negotiate with you? They know they're getting their next payment next month. You've done so for the last 2 years. So the only way banks ever negotiate is after the account is in charge-off status, or some banks, if it's approaching charge-off status. So now I'm not telling you to go stop paying your credit cards and your personal loans and to be able to negotiate them, because obviously your credit score will take a big ding and you're probably going to be stuck with that another 2, 3, 4 years. You'll be able to negotiate it eventually, but that's not what I'm advising to do. The point of this was really to explain to you how debt works, right? And once you understand that, it's what I find interesting is that sometimes it kind of lets you see how the world really works and why so many people are over leveraged. But honestly, man, that's not me. So now the last slide is the Q&As. If you want to join New Leaf Academy, just scan that QR code. If you want to register for next week's event is basically advanced tactics on how to pay off debt. These are the same tactics that I teach my clients and I teach my one-on-one students. If you want to register for the next event, go there. You'll also be able to register for the event in 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks on the 27th when I'm bringing in Tina. Now, Tina is the lady who does the debt settlement for all my one-on-one clients, right? So in Newly Financial, I advise the clients on how they can do their own debt settlement. I'll even get on the phone with them, right, on a 3-way call to help them. But sometimes if they need like experience, Tina's the lady I call. So in 2 weeks, you're going to be able to ask her any questions about debt settlement. She's going to be talking to you about specific things on how to get 70 to 80% discount. She's going to talk about 1099s and how to potentially leverage 1099s to be able to get the debt completely wiped off and get some settlement back on top of that. She's phenomenal. She's phenomenal. And I can't wait for you guys to get to meet her. Now, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll be here until, if there's no questions until 7:30, then that's it. That's the presentation for today, honestly, guys. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll be right here. What's up, Jerry? Unmute your mic, man.
I've got one.
What's up, man?
My question kind of goes, it may be just one to wait for Tina, but when it comes to the negotiation of the debt settlement, is one, do you include taking the debt off of the credit report? And two, how successful you usually with that process, especially if it's past the statute of limitation?
So here's the thing, right? Usually when you're dealing with original, because when you're looking at your credit report, you usually see two things. You see the original creditor with a charged off account, and then you see the collection account as well, right? Now, with the collection account, if the debt is already with a junk debt buyer, 9 out of 10 times, junk debt buyers love to leverage that as part of the negotiations. So when you see something on your credit report like LVNB, Portfolio, Midland, Bull City, I think Resurgent, a bunch of junk debt buyers, they'll do it as part of the negotiation, and they're easy. Like most of them, you'll be able to see them, like you'll be able to go on their websites on their frequently asked pages, and in those frequently asked pages, they'll say it themselves. So sometimes when I don't know a collection company and I'm looking over a client's report, the first thing that I'll do is I'll go to that company's website. Like if you go to Midland Recovery's website right now, they'll say right on their website, once the debt is paid, whether it's in settled or paid in full, we'll remove it off your credit report. Now there's only like now the original creditors, they usually tend not to agree to these things, but we still pay them for the sole fact that we're able to build our credit reports on top of that, right? So let's say because there's a misconception that a lot of people have that in order to get to the 700s and the 720s and the 750s, and the 720s and the 750s, that you basically need to have a clean record. And it's not true. I've seen people with 730 pluses with 5 paid off charge-offs on their credit report. And the thing is, you have to remember, the FICO credit score, they really only care, like they care about your whole report. But what the most important data to them is the last 2 years. So if you can show 2 good positive years of payment history, you're good to go. Now, here's the catch-22. And I didn't learn this until 2 years ago. The catch-22 is you can have the best 3 years of payment history that you've ever had in your life. If you still have if you have an unpaid collection or an unpaid charge-off, your credit score is going to be stagnant. So, and your credit score doesn't move past that like plateau until you pay that last charged off account.
Mm.
I think if you look at the exposing the credit repair industry, I show actual screenshots of my FICO employees talking about this. Somebody who was like the analytics, the vice president of analytics at FICO was doing like an ask me anything on myfico.com. And
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about the difference between a paid charge off and an unpaid charge off. And the big difference was that a paid charge off, it starts aging out slowly, right? It starts aging out kind of like a late payment. But an unpaid charge off, it'll stay on your credit report for 7 years, yes, and it'll impact you the same way on day one as it does on year 7. Meanwhile, a paid charge off, it'll stay on there for 7 years, yes, but then the effect of it wears off little by little, sort of like a late payment.
Mm.
So that's why I remember I said, I was like, so many people forget their ultimate goal, and their ultimate goal should be to have better credit, not just necessarily to remove all the negatives. Because all your goal is to have better credit, not to have a flawless credit report.
But that's all you hear floating around out there is don't pay
Uh-huh.
collections, don't pay collections. They have it in
Yeah.
bold and capital letters and exclamation points. It's like, okay, so then what do you do with it? If you
Mhm.
don't pay it, then what are you supposed to do
Exactly.
with it, especially if it's sitting there all the time?
Exactly. And that's my main pet peeve with that, right? Because yes, I understand there's certain times where you shouldn't pay off a collection, right? Like let's say a collection is not on your credit report anymore and it's outside the statute of limitations and it becomes time barred debt. Why should you pay that debt? Legally, they can't sue you for it. Yeah, they can keep collecting on it and bothering you, but they can't sue you for it. My pet peeve with when people say don't pay off your collections is that it takes paying off the collections out of the conversation. So customers don't have to, so you don't have that conversation with the customer at all,
Mm.
right? And there's many cases where I've seen people and I've seen credit repair companies that come up to me and they ask me questions. A lot of times they'll be like, "Yo, I've been trying to fight this account for 12 months, right? I've been trying to fight this account for 12 months, and the client's mad at me." And I look at the account, and it's like LVNV that will do a pay for delete,
Mm-hmm.
and it's probably like a $600 amount. And that's the problem. The problem is that if you tell the client, don't pay your collections, right? I get it. There's some truth to that. But the thing
Mm-hmm.
is, if you tell clients don't pay your collections, you don't owe that money, it removes that conversation from the table. That conversation is just not had at all. And I feel like it does a disjustice to the clients because that the expectations should be set up front and the client should be able to decide how quickly they want those results. And if they have the power to remove an account by paying it, the client should have that information in order to be able to make that decision. And when you tell them, don't pay off your collections, it just removes that power from the client because now the client's just waiting for the next dispute letter to get sent out and hoping and praying that the collection falls off the credit report. It's like in that year that you were disputing that account and it didn't come off, you could have been building your credit.
Makes sense.
That's the thing, man. Let me see. Do
Makes sense.
I have any other questions? Great presentation. Thank you. Make sure you get it ready before you pay them. Yeah. So if you don't find that the collection company has it under frequently asked, make sure you get it in writing, or if you can, get a recording of the conversation. Because I've seen cases where they'll tell you over the phone, yeah, we'll do it. Yeah, we'll do it. And then they won't do it. And I've seen cases where if you get the recording and you submit it to the CFPB, the CFPB is actually able to overturn that and get the account removed. So I've seen cases of that happening. You want to make sure you protect yourself, right? Now, my favorite way to do it is really researching the company, right? Really researching like my FICO forums and like looking up the collection company, right? Because if you look it up and in the last month, 4 or 5 people have reported that they removed debt after you pay them, then maybe it's not as important for you to get that piece of paper. Yeah,
Mm.
it's important, but sometimes you have to understand they don't want to get recorded saying those things because it goes against not the law, it goes against the contracts that they have in place with the credit bureaus. right? The credit bureaus just want all the data they have on you. And it's a violation of that contract that they have if a collection company is like, oh, we'll remove the reporting of the item if you pay us. So they don't want to get recorded saying that, and they don't want to have something like a letter saying that. Now, the recording might be easier to get than the letter. And if you're checking the data points on my FICO, and you see like, well, okay, let's just say Elgato Collections, right? Elgato Collections, I've seen 5 people in the last 6 months that they've gotten the item removed after payment. Then okay, if they don't want to provide me the letter, cool. Maybe they just provide me the voice, like the voice recording, and that's fine, right? Now, if it's a company that I don't know any data points on, then you're taking a risk. If you're typing in like a collection company on my FICO forums and nothing's coming up, you're really taking that risk because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if they're going to remove that debt. But remember, you can always build with FICO 9. You could always build with FICO 9 because FICO 9 doesn't take into consideration paid charge-offs into the scoring algorithm. So even if the account doesn't get removed, yeah, you're stuck building with FICO 9 for a couple of years. But you could do a lot with FICO 9. You got Navy Fed with FICO 9, right? And Navy Fed, as you know, Jerry, they're very relationship-based. Plus, you have FICO 9 on top, you're valid. You got Penn Fed, you got DCU, you got the Apple Card. You got so many banks that pull that. You can have fun for 2 years just off of FICO 9, man. But most people, they won't give themselves that luxury because I don't want to pay the collection. I have no written agreement. Come on, man, get out of here. I'm telling you, man, like it's a dangerous, it's a jungle out there. It's a jungle out there, but there's only there's multiple ways that I've heard to get debt discharged, and I don't want to explain that in this community. I want to let the experts explain it, right? I don't want it to be like a game of telephone where they tell me how something works and then I try to give it back to you guys. No, like I just want them to come here and explain it to you. I'll talk about what I know. I'll talk about what I know from my years of experience. Everything else that I don't know or I slightly don't know, I'm not going to pretend to know. I'm just going to bring the people that I know that subject and pull some strings and try to get them in front of you guys. So that's it. If you guys have any last questions, let me know. If not, then we will be out. Let's see, by 7:40. If anybody has any last minute questions, if not, by 7:40, I'm out. If you guys could, please drop a good review on the community. That way more people come to the next event. And then we have more questions. And then this community just goes a lot faster. All right? Don't worry, I'm gonna bring some heavy hitters in this community. Really appreciate you guys showing up. It really means a lot to me. It's very scary doing these events, honestly. I prep the whole day for them. I try to make shit work like this. What? Yo, I'm so proud of that. You don't understand, man.
You did awesome, sir. You did awesome.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Anybody have any last minute questions? If not, peace.
Peace out.
All right. You have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for the call, bro.
Good time, man.